issues to be attended to. Firstly, it is the issue of creating new qualifications for one to be elected to be a member of parliament or a councillor. The bill brings in a scenario where it says if you have been convicted in the previous 12 months for certain offenses, you cannot qualify to stand as a member of parliament or as a councillor. We believe that this provision is not only retrogressive, but we believe that it violates the Constitution of Zimbabwe. We believe that the Constitution, in terms of Section 125 and Section 278, sufficiently covers the qualifications that are required for a person to be elected as a member of parliament or as a councillor. And therefore, to try and introduce other qualifications, we feel that it is an attempt to curtail some members of the opposition from contesting for those positions. And therefore, our suggestion is that that clause should fall away. But above all, contrary to what is in the public domain, that there is nothing that has been taking place with regards to electoral reforms, there are certain platforms that had already taken place and where certain agreements had been reached. And it is our view that those agreed positions should find themselves within the bill that is currently before Parliament. We are all aware that Poland, where we are not participants, had a document in which they agreed certain positions in terms of electoral reforms. We would be happy to see those agreements that they had at Poland being included in the current electoral amendment bill. We would be also glad to see the agreements that were done during the interaction between civil society organizations and parliament through the ZANU bill. Certain agreements were made during those engagements, and we would love to see those agreements finding themselves in the current electoral bill. But there were also other parallel activities that were being undertaken by political parties that are in parliament, facilitated by civil society organizations. Again, there was a meeting of the minds in certain respects, and we wish to see those agreements getting into the bill. But above all, we will all remember that one of the reasons that pushed this country into the liberation struggle was universal suffrage, to make sure that every citizen of a qualifying age can participate in the determination of who is going to govern them. This bill does not talk about disenfranchised citizens in terms of elections. We have got a number of citizens that are disenfranchised, and on top of them is the diaspora. Statistics indicate that we have got between 4 and 7 million Zimbabwean citizens that are resident outside the country. We appreciate the challenges that are raised by other quarters to the extent that they cannot vote for a councillor, they cannot vote for a member of parliament because of the residence requirements. However, we have seen in other jurisdictions here in Africa, those that are in the diaspora being allowed to participate at least in the presidential election. Why? Because the constituents for the presidential election is the entire country. So the residence issue does not arise. We have a number of unregistered voters who have failed to register due to accessibility issues. We know that ZEC has got centers throughout the country, but can you imagine a person in the rural area having to board a bus, paying $20 one way just for the sake of going to register? We believe that that is almost impossible, and it is disenfranchising. And as a result, we have made proposals. Our proposal is that there should be a mandatory clause in this bill that shall force ZEC to undertake a voter registration blitz at least 4 months before a general election. And we hope that it will be taken care of. The other disenfranchised population is that of prisoners. As we believe that it might be impossible to make every prisoner to vote, we believe that there are prisoners who are serving long-term sentences. Those an administrative action can be taken to ensure that they exercise their right to vote. We also propose that this bill should talk about accessibility of the voters' roll in analyzable formats. But above that, we believe that it has become international best practice that before a general election, an audit of the voters' roll is conducted by reputable audit firms. And it is our call that we should have at least 3 reputable audit firms agreed upon by contestants to audit the voters' roll before we get into the election. And the reason for that is public. It is common cause. It is because we don't want then to talk about ghost voters, duplicate voters. We need a voters' roll that is acceptable to everyone else. We have also made a proposal that the procurement, design, and security of the ballot paper should be agreed upon by the contestants. And again, that is a best practice that we have seen happening in our neighbors' jurisdictions. We also believe that Section 110, subsection 3, especially paragraph C up to paragraph F of the current Electoral Act, needs to be amended in the sense that collation, addition, and tabulation of results that are received at the National Transmission Results Center, in terms of that act, are simply reviewed and done by the CEO without the involvement of the agents of the participants in the presidential election. Similarly, the announcement of results in terms of that law seems to ignore the fact that before an announcement is made, the agents of participants in that election should validate those results as being correct collection of the figures that would have come from the polling stations. And as a result, we believe that that particular section should be amended. In addition to that, at polling stations, we believe that presidential results should not be exempted from being posted outside the polling station or from being declared at that polling station. There is no harm in declaring at a particular polling station that presidential candidate X got so many votes, whilst presidential candidate X, Y got so many votes. And then finally, we believe that our electoral law has got a big gap. It is a law that talks about declaration of presidential results, but does not speak about transition of power. And therefore, we have made a proposal that there should be an ad hoc committee which is responsible for transferring power from a previous government to a new government which would have been declared by ZEC. And in that regard, we have made proposals of who shall comprise of that committee. The composition literally comprises of members of the bureaucracy, headed by the Chief Secretary to the Cabinet, to the President and the Cabinet. We believe that that committee should be able, after our results have been announced and declared, to then start working on ensuring that the president-elect begins to take over the levers of power. That is what we have made as a proposal, and we look forward that those proposals will be taken aboard as we debate the Electoral Amendment Bill, HB 2022, in Parliament today. Thank you, spokesperson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that has been very clear. You are now conscious and aware as those responsible of informing society in terms of how we have, in the past few months, under extreme difficult conditions, have been able to build a credible alternative. And you have seen the work that we've been doing in Parliament. So we'll take a few questions or areas of clarification before we adjourn. Thank you. So it's the tradition, you introduce yourself and then question. Yes, Ru.
Thank you very much. Councillor Makoni spoke of having beyond 12,000 polling stations. Is the party capacitated to fund the polling agents in all those areas in the beyond 12,000 polling stations? And then secondly, the default of ZANU is the use of violence. I think that's what the councillor said. Can we have an update on the court case of the people who knew what happened to the states and how far?
Thank you. Another question? Okay, so I'll quickly clarify. The question on 12,000 agents. Look, one of the most important things we have done as an alternative, and CCC, learning from our experience in the trenches for the past 2 decades, was making sure that we correct the ills of the past. So we did an internal audit of our participation in our yesteryear movement in terms of the electoral process, the deficiencies of the party itself outside the other challenges. And one of the most signaled issues was the issue of deployment of political party agents, of our very popular constitutional case challenge and the issue of the V11s. And that's why we've made sure that our political and electoral infrastructure is set and is ready to ensure that we're able to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that we've won the election. So the next election, when we enter into the plebiscite, we've created an infrastructure that is sufficient, that is organic, that is more scientific, that is more objective in its trust and in its mandate to ensure that we're able to count elections, because this is within the confines of the law in terms of how much we get in council, how much we get in parliament, and of course in the presidential election, so that we're able to have confidence beyond any scientific doubt that Zimbabwe must be ushered towards a democratic breakthrough. The question on terror, of course, we know that our opponents are very scared. You saw that a few days ago, one of their stalwarts was actually, motivating their members in ZANU that you must steal the alternative identity documents. It shows a regime that is in panic, a regime that is desperate, and we are putting more pressure towards a democratic breakthrough. And we know that ZANU has unleashed its last tool on the shelf, which is the tool of violence. They want to win on the margin of terror. And we are going to make sure that, one, we protect ourselves, we protect our members in the community through the envelope of peace, and making sure that Zimbabwe works towards a democratic breakthrough. Our members in Mrewa, actually very unfortunate. We reported yesterday that the developments were actually proving that there was targeting of actually victims being turned into perpetrators. But the signal issue that you see from Mrewa is number one. We have presence in the countryside, contrary to the mystery and the propaganda too that they want to present. That's why you see them running from post to pillar to try and destabilize, disorganize, and disenfranchise us from organizing and operating in rural areas. We made it very clear during our Mkwazo program last year that the focus is on rural areas. Our focus is on the countryside, but we are conscious of the challenges that might face our people in the countryside. That's why you don't see ourselves publicizing much of our work, because we think that we must not put our people at risk, and we must make sure that we protect rural communities from a trigger-happy regime. What you see in Mrewa is a case of impunity, that perpetrators are walking scot-free. Our members mentioned by names, publicly and to the police, that these are the people that executed violence. Not only that, but the advent of social media also helped the police in its investigation by identifying the particular individuals, the person who was recording videos, and the people who were beating up old people just because they gathered for a meeting. So the biggest challenge as we go into election is impunity. How do we resolve the crisis of impunity, where perpetrators walk scot-free? We have seen how members of ZANU PF has been inciting violence, threatening the life of the president of the alternative, and members of our party. Just recently in Kwekwe, they also made threats that Honorable Judith Tobaiwa must not be allowed to address. Look, we are conscious of all these challenges and the difficulties. That's why our focus is to make sure that against all odds, we win the election, and we know that they are going to be pushing that envelope of terror, that envelope of harvest of fear to try and intimidate our people. But we are focused on the big task, and the big task is to win Zimbabwe for change. Yes, Mlo.
Okay, spokesperson, addressing the media yesterday, the president of the Movement for Democratic Change, Mr. Douglas Muzwa, alluded to the fact that there is now a high-level delegation between CCC, the ZANU PF, and the MDC, where you want to agree on the electoral framework. Are you part of that, and what is coming out of that? Then, secondly, given that you do not have the required numbers in Parliament, and the electoral bill in its current state may actually sail through, are you likely going to boycott the elections if some of your concerns are not addressed?
Okay.
I want to find out, are these proposals coming from those high-level talks, or these are just proposals from CCC?
So you say in the talks you are represented by your SG work, and ZANU PF is represented by Chasile himself, is representing the MDC.
Thank you very much. I think that our answer is an absolute and an eloquent no to that particular assumption. We know that there is too much appetite, particularly from the said individuals whose political career is sliding into political relic and the dustbins of history in the politics of our country. That's why there's so much appetite and intention to try and ride on the shoulders of political giants in this country in the form of Citizens Coalition for Change. I say this in more scientific terms, in terms of those that have been able to pull numbers in the politics of our country. The said individual, my brother Mlondolozi, I think is better placed to answer where, when, and who, because we have not had any so-called high-level political dialogue. We are an open movement, a very transparent movement. Anything that we do does not happen under the carpet. The Honorable has mentioned conversations that we've done through Parliament as our theater of struggle. And those things are not secret. And those things' objective is to inform the legislative agenda in our country. So you must understand that the objective of our conversation is based, number one, that we are represented in Parliament. Number two, we are engaging organs responsible and those that can be able to help us drive reform within the theater of struggle, which is Parliament. The appetite to try and invite us into coffee tables, dinner tables, and try to present trinkets and trappings of dictatorship is not what we have appetite for. And you know that those type of colleagues are interested in those particular issues of benefits issues of trinkets and trappings of dictatorship. We are not interested in that. We have made ourselves very clear. We have had engagement, like we have said. There was an engagement through civil society organizations, which are conversations with members of parliament who are represented in parliament on conversations around how parliament can be able to advance the reform agenda. Not the so-called underground dialogue on Nando's and strawberry dessert. That's not what we are interested on, and we are not part and parcel of that particular conversation. Our focus is that Zimbabwe must have reforms. Once we have reforms, we have a government that is undisputed, a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. So I think that I've answered that very clearly, and I'll give that Honorable Tobago to answer the question in terms of what has been happening in Parliament and clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Spokes. Mlondolozi, I think this is not time about numbers. For us, this is time about substance. For us, this is time about patriotism. I strongly believe that there are patriotic citizens that are in the Parliament of Zimbabwe. And what they are most interested in is to see a country that is stable, a country that is peaceful, a country that doesn't have disputed electoral outcomes. And because of that, and because of the substance of our proposals, I strongly believe that numbers will not matter, but the substance will matter. And for sure, those proposals that I've mentioned came from CCC. They did not come from any imagined high-level meeting. I thank you, Spokes.
Thank you very much. I think that is clear in terms of our role in Parliament, unless, okay, you can come after.
All right, my name is Kudzaro from TechMec TV. My question is directed at you, Councillor Makoni. You say that you make sure that elections aren't stolen this year. Now, I want to take you back to 2008. We saw what happened. ZANU PF lost and they tampered with their election result. What measures have you put in place to ensure that history does not repeat itself?
Okay.
My name is Problem from East. My question is, do you think there's still enough time for all these amendments that you want?
Okay. Okay, I'll give Councillor Ian to respond on the first question.
You know, history has got this knack of repeating itself, but if you continue to do the same thing, then you are insane. We have learned a lot from the past, from 2008, from all previous elections. Would you have imagined that we were in fact ready to field 100% polling agents in all the 4,000 polling stations at which the by-elections were contested? So we have learned not only from 2008, but we've also learned a lot from 2022. So when I say they will not steal again, I'm being empirical. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Problem, about your question. I still recall that when we were working on the delimitation report, one of the major concerns that was coming from citizens was, do we still have enough time to have this delimitation report to be attended to by ZEC and then finally gazetted? Today, as we speak, the final delimitation report is in the hands of the President, and we look forward to have it gazetted in the next few days. Now, the electoral reforms that are required don't need so much time. If Parliament has allowed itself that it should finish the debate on the electoral amendment bill in the National Assembly this week, I guess it can bring aboard all the proposals and have the bill sail through the National Assembly this week. It goes to Senate next week, and by the end of next week, we'll be having literally a new act. And therefore, yes, it is possible for these reforms to be implemented before the general elections that are forthcoming.
Thank you very much. I think that you have had, just also to clarify, is that if you have read our 7 minimum demands, they are to do with the process of the election. For example, we talk about opening space for people to register to vote. That can be done. We have time to have a blitz and allow people to register. Before we even do that, we must have a blitz for identity documents, because that is the biggest issue in Zimbabwe. We also talk about the things